All right, give it 1 second. We've got some people adding in right now. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you all so much for joining us on your lunch break. It's always wonderful to have people take the time to share a meal with us and learn something new and exciting. We are at the 2-minute mark, so we'll go ahead and get started here in just a moment. I see we still got a couple people adding in. Great. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about the topic, not every executive is a leader, and that is a good thing. I'm really excited about today's presentation. Curtis is going to be walking us through executive leadership, and then executives and leaders, and we'll get a taste of a new topic with some great information. So Curtis is a regular speaker on leadership and culture, and he's been recognized multiple times by the Dallas Business Journal as CEO of the Year. So you're talking to somebody with great expertise and great knowledge in the area who can absolutely provide insight to everybody on this call. This is a great topic for individuals at all levels of the organization, and is also well-fitting in the realm of conscious capitalism, of which Curtis is also greatly involved, including serving on the International Board of Directors for Conscious Capitalism. Now, throughout this presentation, I would encourage you to interact with us. Feel free to drop messages in the chat. You can drop questions there. We will try to answer them in as real time as possible. If you would like to ask your question in person or provide some follow-up information, make sure that you raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll get you unmuted so you can speak with Curtis directly. Again, we are really encouraging participation, so make sure you ask questions along the way. And without further ado, Curtis, I'd like to turn it over to you to walk us through executive and leadership.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily. And it's good having everybody on this call. I am excited about the topic today, that not every executive is a great leader, and that's really a good thing. This is the first time I've presented this subject, and I'm actually looking for a lot of input. I think that it is something that's very valuable to not only the improving organization, but could be valuable to many organizations as a whole. So throughout this presentation, if you do have questions, please add. If you want a clarification, please put that into the chat. And at the very end, I've included my email, so that if you are external to our organization, you are welcome to send me feedback directly. So what do I mean that not every executive is a leader, and that this is actually a very good thing? I want to start by saying that in today's business environment, position and authority are very often confused with leadership. What's happened, and I think that you've seen a lot of the debates over time, it's decade-old, if not century-old debate about, well, what makes a good manager? What makes a good leader? And we have found through years of exploration on this particular topic at our company that there are very distinct attributes that make up each of these things. And when we're not careful, they often get confused. In fact, I think that leadership as a term is often used too loosely and too broadly. Inside our own organization, we refer to our leadership team or our leadership meetings, maybe even our leadership development programs, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And unfortunately, what we do when we use this term is we create that confusion I talked about, because we are often referring to something that actually has nothing to do with a person's ability to demonstrate true leadership attributes. And I want to talk about that these words that we use are very important. And when we use a word too loosely, not only can it create confusion, but it can create unintended results. And as I put this picture up here in front of us, I want to use it as an example. I think almost everybody in the world today can relate to this picture. I think this was posted in April of 2020. You have these circles on the ground and people had to stand in these circles. What were we doing? Well, what we were doing was social distancing. That was the word that globally got accepted, or the term that globally got accepted. Yet when you look up the definitions of what we were trying to do, you look at the photographs, what we were really trying to do is physically distance. And that had plenty of benefits to it. I'm not arguing the benefit or not, but we were at the time of the pandemic, and the real intent was to physically distance, but we used the word socially distance. Unfortunately, a large number of the populace not only physically distance, but socially distance. And we know that that caused today widespread mental health challenges throughout the world. We did what we thought was good. We followed the words, yet an unconscious communication such as that affected millions and millions of people in ways that did not benefit them. And I think that organizations today that are not careful in the terms of leadership and management and executive, right, administrator, are having lasting impacts within their organization. Leadership is not position. It's not somebody that's in a position of authority. It's not every executive, but instead it's a set of attributes that these people demonstrate. And inside of our own organization, I believe it's more accurate to collectively refer to people that are in these positions of authority as executives and not as a leader in particular. And manage should also be used with a high degree of discretion. And that is what I'm here to talk about today. But a little bit of context before I move on. And somebody on this call is going to actually recognize this slide. I'd mentioned in the introduction that this is a topic that people at Improving have been exploring now for nearly a decade. And we're trying to formalize in a way that's very conscious with our communication these characteristics. This was an actual exercise that we did within a program called the Emerging Leaders Program. And it was the very first kickoff of the very first Emerging Leaders Program. We brainstormed what has made the best leaders that you've ever worked for. And we were looking for commonalities between people that shared a common set of experiences. And without going too far into what this says, because we've evolved a lot since then, in the second Emerging Leader Program, we actually had interviewed probably more than 50 people at the time. We started getting others' input inside and outside the company, and we were ready 3 years later to finally put this into a more formal model. And once we put it into a formal model, the last piece of context that really plays into the presentation today was I got asked by one of our most senior executives, we have our ELP, our Emerging Leaders Program, but what about me? And I asked her, what do you mean, what about me? Well, that's a program for leaders. And my core strength is management. And it was at that time that we shifted the direction because we had a formal leadership model, but that was only a small piece of the overall picture that we were trying to create at Improving. And where we were leaving out large groups of people with different strengths because we were too loosely using that word leadership. That program was really not an emerging leaders program. Certainly it had leaders in it. But that program we shifted the name almost immediately. It's the executive development program, not emerging. We changed it from leaders to executives. And it was a little bit embarrassing to me because as a conscious leader, somebody that prides myself in conscious communication, for so many years, I was overlooking the important difference between these. So this is a long journey. You're seeing the culmination, many of you for the first time. It is the first time we've tried to formalize this. And something else, when we now talk about executives and the different types of executives, one thing that I can say with certainty that in general, people at Improving and people at their jobs want to find a way to contribute to these organizations that we belong to, both personally and professionally. We just want to contribute. We want to add value, which is a very noble intent. And this contribution most often comes through two broad categorizations: the individual contribution that we bring to the table, and possibly the influence of others to individually contribute. And the latter is one of the main roles that executives play within an organization. I'm using the term executive very carefully. We may want to say leaders provide, because isn't that what leaders do, influence? That's actually what executives do, as I will clarify in the next slides. I mentioned this, that all executives find a way to probably contribute individually and to contribute through influence. But depending on the type of executive position they are in or their own strengths, they may actually lean into one of the specific types more specifically. And if we go too much on just this simple definition of influence or individual contribution, some people may overemphasize the individual contribution because they want to lead by example, which is very admirable. It can actually lead to inspiration if they're doing this. But if they do that without influencing, then they diminish their role as an executive, the context. Yet there are some people, and you have a term for this, ivory tower. Those are people that tend to influence and almost never drop into the individual contribution. So at Improving, we believe that there is a combination of these two things. Different balances work for different people and for different executives, but we have to carefully consider our role in each. The other thing we assume is we assume good intent. And I think this is very important. One person talked to me at one point, said something that lasted with me, is that we tend to judge others by their actions, yet ourselves by our own good intent. Well, isn't that interesting? Right? It would probably be better if we were to judge it all, to judge ourselves by our actual actions and then assume good intent in others. And overall, the years, more than 25 years of leading an organization, what I have found is that executives in general, share a good intent. And that is to deliver exceptional results for the organization. What differs is their approach. And that approach differs because, as I mentioned earlier, different personal strengths, different worldviews, maybe their personality, maybe even their preferences, but they lean into different aspects, different ways to deliver exceptional results for our organization, usually with great results. And this can lead to some conflict, hopefully productive within organizations, but not because of bad intent. It's quite natural. If somebody is good at something or has a strength, that's going to be something they rely on. But what we have to also remember is that their strengths are not ours, and our strengths are not theirs. And when we come together as a team, we actually get to leverage the group strengths so that we can individually contribute. Yet I have also found that most executives predominantly rely on one mechanism to influence the members of their team. I've broadly categorized these into leadership, management, and administration. And all of these are extremely important to the organization. So let's start or dive a little bit more into influence. And there's a fill in the blank here, but tends to rely on blank to influence an organization. What does a leader tend to rely on? Leaders tend to rely on inspiration to influence an organization, while managers tend to rely on the authority they've been given in a position to influence an organization. And administrators tend to rely on the authority that's granted through compliance to influence an organization. And before you're too quickly to judge how this has been divided, or to maybe look down at one or two of these, I do want to say that they're all very important if we are trying to scale organizations. And each organization needs each of these things to happen as we become mature. The other note, the reason why I have a star next to tens, almost every executive I've found is not negligent in two of these and then has great strength in one. It's usually a blend of all three. With that said, I can also say that I have seen certain executives that have almost all in one of these categories. Again, they provide very significant value to the organization, but influence is their primary role. As a simple comparison, I mentioned this before, deliver exceptional results is a common goal of each of these executives. How do they influence? Already mentioned this, through inspiration as a leader, positional authority from management, and governance authority through administration. And the medium becomes very different for each of them. Leaders have a tendency to rely on people as their primary mechanism to influence, while managers also work with people. They tend to use plans and schedules as their primary medium. And administrators use process, procedures, and tasks. And then when it comes to culture, as another comparison, leaders tend to establish and shape it. And a lot of the managers tend to enact it. Administrators may even de-emphasize it. And then finally, the primary role in an organization of a leader is direction and initiate, manager plan and manage, and the administrator is here to help the team execution. And I'm hoping that what you can see is the value that every single one of these plays, especially as a team. Let's think about a team of executives. One of my favorite sayings inside of improving is vision without execution is hallucination. Many of the executives at Improving could repeat that over and over. I use it. But if we look at the primary function, let's say direction and initiate, let's say that's the role of people that have these leadership attributes or bent that way. If all they have is very good vision, nothing happens. And if we have an administrator that's just executing without the vision, it becomes very chaotic. People are not going in any direction, yet they're getting things done. And kind of in between the two is, okay, how do we connect these dots? And how do we, between the two, get the benefits of this vision, plan and manage while getting things done? There's a continuum here too that I haven't shown. Another term we use is effectiveness and efficiency. Administrators focus most on efficiency, getting things done. And sometimes if they overemphasize that, then they lose some of the effectiveness of the teams and things like that. Leaders are going to focus on effectiveness predominantly. But it's quite funny. They can sometimes, I've seen them getting almost nothing done. They have a big, happy group of people, but nothing's getting done. And then managers tend to sit in that continuum in between. There are a lot of comparisons like this that we can, and we've found as we've explored these topics through our executive development programs, our integral business programs, but this is really taking shape and something that's very important that we differentiate so we can leverage different people's strengths, and the organization itself can learn to deliver better results because we are delineating the different roles inside of an organization.
Curtis, before you move on, we did have a question in chat from that last slide. Tim asked, can you give an example of how de-emphasizing culture for an administrator can be a good thing for the organization as a whole?
Yes. Okay. So this becomes one of the balances, Tim. In general, I look at that too, and I might react by going, oh no, they've de-emphasized culture. An organization must get things done. And sometimes an overemphasis of culture, and yes, that is possible, can interfere, right? What if the organization was all about just having fun, even at the expense of getting work done? We are all businesses. In the end, this is in the context of executives and businesses. If that happens, a business will eventually go out of business. There won't have sustainability. So there's a balance. And while the administrator may de-emphasize it, it's usually because they're emphasizing that execution. And nothing with establishing and shaping. I'm going to also talk about the culture in that one. I've seen so many organizations come up with values, yet they don't follow them. Why? They didn't have a way to enact those values. At Improving, more than 70% of our employees are participating in what we call trust pods. One of our aspirational values is establishing trust with each of our stakeholders. And so when it comes to that part of our culture, there's the vision of what that trust and shaping it. But now we have to have a plan for actually enabling it. And then we have to be able to move to the team execution of having it. Administrators, in their pursuit of efficiencies that process and procedures and tasks provide to the organization, may de-emphasize culture. So that's a long way, but there's huge nuances like that in these models as well. Sometimes trade-offs. Did you have another question, Emily?
Yes, I do. Larry asks, you mentioned that leadership emphasizes effectiveness, but may not be getting things done. How can there be effectiveness if nothing is getting done?
It's how I'm using that term. Okay. People that tend to value efficiency are looking for the shortcuts. And shortcuts can often mean we're getting more done. In an organization, I've often seen shortcuts come at the expense over a long term of comfort and the erosion of good practices. And like most things on this, it's a balance. What's most important is this balance of how do we move things forward quickly? Efficiency. How do we do it while keeping people motivated? Effectiveness, right? And if we emphasize for too long one or the other, the organization erodes. And I will also point out that very few people, I would say less than 20%, really have strength in only one of these areas. And so we often find our executives have a preference. Our administrators really like to get things done. It causes them stress when things are not getting done. On the other end of the spectrum, the people that share leadership traits, what causes them stress is not getting things done or not getting things done, but it's when there's conflict with people and they need to get that resolved. And the most effective organizations, and I think you're making one of my points here, Larry, which I appreciate, we need both those leadership and the administration careful balance. The most effective organizations and efficient organizations blend those two.
Great. And then Curtis, there is a final question on this slide. Corey was curious, have there been any significant variation in how these styles respond to adversity?
Oh, that is a great question. And Corey, I wish we've explored that. Just got that one added to my explore list. There could probably be an entire line here of how they handle and respond to adversity. There certainly is. I just haven't explored it. I wish that I had. Thank you for the question, and that'll be a great topic for some of our executive development programs to work on.
And then again, I'm sorry to keep us on this slide.
Oh, this is great. I love this.
I love it too. Ed was curious, do you have a correlation of this paradigm to the power of TED? Some examples are leader to coach, challenger, and or creator.
That I view as more of a mindset that any one of these could have. And what Ed is referring to is a book called The Power of TED. It's the empowerment dynamic. And that psychologically, you may have heard of things that some people have a victim mindset while other people have a creator mindset. What I will say is leaders, because they are more forward thinking, will have more of a propensity to be in that creator mindset. And I would say that if not careful, administrators may be caught on some of the victim mindset and backward-looking problem versus forward-looking administrative. But that is a way too broad characterization because that's more on an individual basis than it is a personal basis. What I will say is, when it comes to the power of TED, the most effective administrators, managers, or leaders are almost always positive. And it is hard to be positive if you are trapped in a victim mindset. So all three, if they are really living into the potential of their position are going to be creator or positive minded. The little red bubble just keeps on growing as I stick on this subject, but I can't see it.
You're good. No more questions on this, but everyone keep posting in the chat and we'll make sure to ask them in real time.
Fantastic. So what is all this exploration done? We are literally talking hundreds and hundreds of hours of group exploration as we've explored these. And we've come up with two primary models now, not just one. We have a leadership model that talks about the characteristics that seem to be common amongst all of the best leaders that we've worked with, and a management and administration model, which tend to actually have very similar characteristics, right? But then applied very differently. And I'm going to go into the details of these shortly in a few slides. But before I do so, I want to talk about one of the reasons why there's this confusion. Why is there this debate about, oh, are you a manager? Are you a leader? Are you a good one or not? And I already mentioned one reason, that the term leader is often, at least in the business realm, referred to loosely. Just anybody that has authority is a leader, and that's not true in my opinion. The second reason is because when we have explored these two things, we found that there is an overlap of half of the six most important attributes between both leaders and managers and administrators. And those three are outlined here. And I'm going to start at the bottom because we already had a question about that. I have, at this point, I've asked this question hundreds of times. How would you describe your favorite manager, your favorite leader, your favorite executive that you've ever worked for? A similar question. Name the three favorite managers, executives, or leaders that you've ever worked for. And once they've named all three, would you describe them as predominantly positive, predominantly negative, or somewhere in between? More than 90%, they are described as positive. If you think of over all the years, how many people must have been named in that question? They get to open-ended name their three favorites. Not a single one, not one was described as negative predominantly. 90+% described as positive, and probably somewhere in the 7 to 8% are described somewhere in the middle between those two. If you're an executive and you are not perceived as being positive overall, I can assure you, you are at a disadvantage. How much of that? It depends on how much it's made up for in some of these other traits. But I assure you, you are starting from a place 92%. And I can't tell you how critical that is. And so, Ed, back to your question about creator mindset or victim mindset. Creator mindsets tend to be very positive, future state thinking, possibility. And I'm not talking about optimists. That's a different subject. Optimism is not what I'm talking about. You can be positively realistic. But positivity is a shared strength of the most effective and efficient executives. The second one that we have found, and this is through our exploration of trust at Improving, Every one of the best executives has found a way to be trustworthy amongst the majority of the people that are in their organizations. Trust, we carefully chosen the word trustworthy. We follow something, or we are big proponents of Covey's The Speed of Trust. And there are 13 different behaviors that different people value differently that establish trust with other people within their circles. What we have found in this exploration is managers tend to value certain aspects like accountability, which is a practice. Accountability is one of the 13 trust behaviors. They tend to value that more. And administrators may value some more, and leaders may value some of the other 13 behaviors, but they all find a way to establish trust in the long run. Now, remember, I'm not saying every executive does this. I'm saying every one of the best ones. When you start naming those three, the best ones you've ever worked for, they all share that trait. And finally, something that is, we used to call this steady resilience, because steadiness is very important, but it's a flavor of resilience. It actually, the higher up in the organization you get in a typical hierarchy, the more resilience you need. And this isn't something because I'm backwards thinking or because I'm the CEO, I'm saying this. I see this with the executives that work directly for me, that work with them. Tough decisions need to be made. The higher up in the organization, the more darts get thrown at you. The higher up in the organization, the more statements I hear like, we should be doing this, we should be doing this. If we were good, we would be doing this. And yet there's limited times, and there's limited time, there's limited resources. And if you aspire to be an executive, that's just part of the job. I don't feel sorry for any of us. There's benefits that come with it, but it does take this resilience as people start to take target at you and the organization. And I would have found that the deepest, let's just take some of our presidential candidates. And this is not a political statement. It doesn't matter if you're left and right. As soon as you declare that you are running for president and you're in the final two, you have a multi-billion-dollar campaign on attacking you. So the resilience that you would have to have in that position is beyond me even thinking about. Really, you actually have a campaign to attack you. So these three things have been all common. And because they're common, we start to then say, we start to blend. But what's more important, and I'll go to the next slide, in my opinion, not more important, equally as important is how they're different. When we look at leaders, we found three things to be common, three attributes that the most effective leaders share. One is they're confident. Look at the color wheel. They are resilient, they are trustworthy, they are positive, but they're confident. Have you ever tried to follow somebody that didn't believe in themselves? How could you ever expect somebody to follow you or believe in you if you don't believe in yourself? So there's a fair degree of confidence. And some of the best leaders are overconfident. I get that. You see something outside, we propose to conscious capitalism, conscious leadership, and we add a trait outside of this, a particular type of confidence called grounded confidence, where it's kind of rooted. Yes, you're confident, but arrogance and things like that really aren't well received amongst most people, or many people. I don't know if it's most or not. Right? But a second trait that is different amongst leaders is they initiate. Have you ever waited or have you ever seen executives that are waiting to be told what to do? Yes, there are plenty of them. Many administrators are in that category. They want the plan coming to them. Many of our managers, executives, want a vision set, a direction, and then they can plan. But common to all leaders is their initiators. They initiate things. By definition, they're kind of at the head almost all the time, trying new things out, risk takers, things like that. It kind of makes them what they are. Followers tend to follow the people that are initiating. And I know a lot of people view that as a good trait, but it's not bad if you don't have it. It's just different if you do. But probably most important is all leaders find some way to inspire. Remember, this is how they influence others. And so their inspiration is the means to influence. What we found with managers and administrators, they share the resilience, the trustworthiness, the positivity. But to a T, their reliability and their responsiveness tend to be through the charts. And have you ever met, and I'm in this category, it causes me some embarrassment sometimes, but I am not the most responsive person when it comes to email or text, to the point that people make jokes. I'm tolerated in this way as well. But if I were to look at the best manager and best administrator executives at our company, they are phenomenal in these areas. You ask once, it gets done. You ask once, it's responded to within the hour. It's amazing when you see these people living into their strengths. And the next trait is accountability. And it's either being accountable themselves or establishing accountability in others. And we have found those three to be common amongst managers and administrators. A little bit more about our model. We subscribe to transforming, to elevating yourself. It takes courage and awareness, courage to face. That's a whole nother presentation. And the last thing I would say about leaders, managers, and administrators is the outer wheel. There are certain aspects that we believe are part of conscious capitalism and conscious leadership, management, administration. That's what the light gray is. But every person has their own strengths that helps differentiate them. And everyone has their own weaknesses. And some people even have aspirations of having new strengths as well. And this is what makes us unique. So if you say, well, Curtis, I think that this is an important strength, possibly. And that's where it would go if you're seeing a lot of that on the outer aspect of this model. And as one last example here, when we look into, there's an entire presentation on inspiration because it's unique. It is the common trait of leaders. One of them, some people, number two up there, some people lead by example, bringing back their individual contribution into it. And the other is some really try to inspire others by casting vision as well and influence others. And then a lot of these traits tend to play together: courage, positivity, confidence. All of those things themselves can also be inspirational. What about resilience, right? When you see somebody go through an incredibly tough time, yet they're the last person standing, that can be inspirational. And leaders tend to focus on this means, inspiration, to actually motivate and influence others. And I only put this as an example because each one of these traits is extremely rich. And my final point that I'll make here, and UX team would say I need a better graphic besides a picture I clipped off the web, but it makes my point. All of these things are precious metals inside of an organization. Platinum and titanium and gold, really, there isn't an order to these. So maybe gemstones would be a better metaphor here. But every single one of these is extremely valuable. And every executive is not a great leader. And that's a good thing because we need great managers and great administrators and great leaders to be the best organizations that we can become. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Emily. I appreciate everybody that came to hear this today.
Well, you're not done yet, sir. Ben did have a question for you, and I'm hoping you could take a second to answer. Ben was wondering if you could provide an example of the difference between optimism and positivity.
Sure. Optimism, sometime, if I were to draw a spectrum, optimism is further along that spectrum than positivity. It can create positivity, but at some point, right, if you avoid some sort of reality, then it can be seen as too far over optimistic. I guess you've heard that term, but and that can be detrimental. The challenge here is different people have different views of what's over optimistic, right? What's a reasonable possibility? So optimism, very close to positivity, would overlap with positivity in a Venn diagram, but has some things that are unique to it as well. There is a continuum on that. I didn't make it part of this presentation, but we have like 10 things on this continuum.
Great. And then Devlin was wondering, does what the organization need change more over time, or is it roughly static?
That's another good question that hasn't been explored extensively, kind of like Corey's question. Mm-hmm. However, I can almost certainly say that it will change and cycle with time and circumstance. There are times, I will say that a year ago, the improving organization really needed additional management and administration. And today, when you look at a tougher economy and you see rising interest rates, which are putting pressures on business, the leadership aspects of our business need to rise. And this is a never-ending cycle as well. And I think if companies can consciously and deliberately choose to invest at different times, that they would benefit the most. So that's a great question, Devlin. Hasn't been explored a lot, but I think that one's a simpler answer that yes, it fluctuates over time based on the circumstances.
Great. Then we've got another question here. Jackie was wondering, what is the best way for leaders to keep their skills sharp?
I think deliberate practice in some of these areas are very important. I'm going to say executives in general can practice trust. What do you mean? These trust pods elevate everybody's game when they participate. It keeps you focused on what builds trust. For leaders, communication, verbal communication becomes very, very important, especially when you're trying to influence. And there are lots of ways to practice that. Trying to communicate your ideas like I'm doing today. It wasn't perfect in my first presentation of this publicly, but I think it includes a lot of great ideas. And I'm going to answer this again. I'm not sure if you meant leaders specifically or executives in general. I'm going to answer executives in general. It's a trust behavior called listen first. Kind of goes with being open to ideas. Never get comfortable. Be open to ideas. Be open to change. We had a leadership model. Specifically, the leadership had 5 attributes. And instead of getting locked in that 3 years later, we're like, oh my gosh, how could we have forgotten this 6th attribute? So being open when people come with ideas to make things better and get better, by the way, is another trust behavior.
Excellent. And then we also have a question from Joe wondering, do you see people moving between administration, management, and leadership successfully as their roles change?
It's something that we need to be mindful of inside of our organizations. And I have seen when I have elevated the wrong type of person into an executive position that needs one of these 3 and they didn't have it, they struggle to succeed. And then when I've moved them into a position that it plays to their strengths, they've over top succeeded. So I would have to look personally at the individual. And again, I'm sure there are a lot of people that of these words, some people will value leader more than manager or administrator. It's not, I don't view it that way because the organization needs all 3. And what I can say is most individuals play one of these roles extremely well, and their positions and their responsibilities best serve the organization if they align. The shift is hard.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we've had posted in the chat. I know we're a couple minutes out. I was hoping, Curtis, though, can you share any contact information or a way for people to reach out to you if they have any more questions after your presentation?
All right, I just stopped sharing my slide. I apologize. My last slide was just my contact information, but it's curtis.height@improving.com. I really am looking for feedback on this, given it's the first public presentation on this subject. More questions like Corey's and Devlin's, which have us explore further these models and how they apply. That's great because we have a large number of people as part of our executive development programs that continue to explore these models and this particular concept. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share this topic. It was excellent. I learned so much, and it sounds like there are several branching topics. So we look forward to having you back again soon, I'm sure. Just a reminder to everyone on the call, we do have our virtual Lunch and Learns weekly Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Central. So please join us each week as we explore a multitude of topics, including topics similar to this one. Next week, we have community building and why it's important to get involved and how to do it. Community building is an important part of how improving works and an important part of conscious capitalism as well. So we're excited to hear Daniel go ahead and talk about that next week. Of course, you can find all of our upcoming talks and recordings for our past talks at improving.com. And as Curtis mentioned, you can reach out to him with feedback on the feedback on the Lunch and Learn that we just saw, or questions about something similar to being an executive or a leader. So again, thank you, Curtis, for your time and your talk and your expertise. We appreciate you joining us today. And everybody on the call, thank you so much for taking the time to learn with us.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.